Right. So get ready, because today we're going to really get into some serious statistics stuff.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking regression modeling strategies. And let me tell you, this book is like the Bible
Really?
for
Yeah.
statisticians, especially the ones who are like super into regression analysis.
Yeah, you're definitely not exaggerating. This book is like, if you could take that like graduate level course on regression that you wish you'd taken, it's all packed into this one book.
Yeah.
It's dense, but it is
Oh,
absolutely brilliant.
it is. And, we have to talk about the author, Frank Harrell.
Of course.
Um,
You legend.
this guy, he's kind of a legend in biostatistics.
Yeah.
He's been such a leading voice in developing all these new statistical methods and stuff, especially, in survival analysis, which, by the way, we will definitely be talking about later on in this deep dive.
Absolutely.
But what's really cool about Harrell's work, it's not just limited to biostatistics. You see his influence like all over medicine, epidemiology, pretty much anywhere.
Yeah.
Researchers are using data to make predictions.
One of the things I find so fascinating about his work is he really emphasizes the why behind the what,
Yeah.
It's not just about like plugging numbers into a formula. It's about understanding all of the assumptions behind the different statistical techniques.
Oh, for sure.
Understanding their limitations, the potential pitfalls, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so basically it's like he wants you to actually understand what you're doing, not just blindly do it.
Exactly.
So let's unpack this book a little bit. Like, imagine you're sitting here with us, flipping through the pages of regression modeling strategies with us.
Yeah.
And this is not like some boring, dry catalog of regression models.
Right.
It's a master class
Oh, yeah.
in how to use these models effectively,
Yeah.
how to choose the right one,
Yes.
how to actually interpret what the results are telling you,
Yeah, how to make sense of them.
and even how to validate them.
Yeah.
Using techniques like bootstrapping, which is pretty cool.
Bootstrapping is super cool.
Yeah, I've always liked that.
Yeah.
Now, what really sets this book apart from others
What makes it so great?
is that it's so practical. Harrell really walks you through the entire process using, real-world examples and even R code.
Yeah. And he has that custom R package to go with it.
Right. Like, you can actually put these techniques
It's awesome.
into practice.
Absolutely.
So in this deep dive,
Yeah.
we're going to explore some of, in my opinion, the most interesting chapters and concepts from this book.
Yes.
And hopefully, get you thinking a little bit differently, spark some ideas.
Spark some aha moments.
Like, exactly.
Love it.
So to kick things off, Chapter 2. Chapter 2 is really where he sets the stage for how to build solid regression models.
It's the foundation.
Yeah, it is. And most people think that statistics is all about simplifying data.
Oh, absolutely. Making it easier to understand.
Right. Like, that's what you learn in Stats 101.
Right.
This chapter really challenges that.
Yeah.
It kind of flips that idea on its head. And one of the things that really stood out to me
What was it?
was that he really challenges this common practice of like chopping up continuous variables into intervals.
Right.
So instead of, using age as a continuous variable, putting it into like age groups.
Like 18 to 25, 26 to 35, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what Harrell argues, and I actually completely agree with him on this, is that when you do that, you lose so much valuable information.
Yeah, you're throwing away information.
You reduce the statistical power of what you're doing. And you might even be introducing bias.
Exactly.
He's a big advocate for using more sophisticated methods like regression splines.
Regression splines. Yeah, those can really capture the complexity.
Yeah.
The relationship between variables.
Well, it's like you're trying to take something that's really complex and just oversimplify it.
And you end up with a distorted picture.
Yeah, you really do. And it makes you think about all those times that I've seen research where the data is categorized like that. I'm like, man, I wonder if they're missing something really big here.
Absolutely.
So it's like by oversimplifying, we're actually making things more complicated.
Yeah, we are.
Now, speaking of complicated, let's talk about something that every data analyst had to deal with.
Uh-oh, I know it's coming.
And that is missing data. Chapter 3 really tackles this.
The elephant in the room.
It is. The elephant in the room, and no one really wants to talk about it.
Yeah, but Harold dives right in.
He does. He's not afraid of it at all. He explains all the different types of missing data.
Yeah.
And why it's so important to actually understand the difference. You've got data missing completely at random.
Yeah.
Data missing at random, which is different.
Right, and this is a very important distinction that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
Missing completely at random versus missing at random.
And then there's that data missing, not at random, which,
oh, tricky.
yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah.
And it really makes a huge difference in how you deal with
Absolutely.
those missing values. And, Harold, what I appreciate is that he doesn't just throw a bunch of techniques at you and say, figure it out.
Here's a cookbook.
Right. He actually guides you through it.
Yeah, he walks you through the decision-making.
He does.
It's like, okay, here's how to figure out what kind of missing data you have, and based on that, here's the most appropriate approach.
Exactly.
He's like holding your hand through the process.
He is, and this is where those advanced techniques, like multiple imputation, really come in handy.
Yeah.
It's not just about, like, filling in the blanks with the average, whatever.
Right. Oh, well, this is missing, so I'll just use the average. No.
You're actually creating, like, multiple data sets.
Yeah, plausible data sets.
That are plausible.
That try to take into account that uncertainty
Yeah.
that those missing values introduce.
Which is a big deal. So you've tackled the missing data.
Yeah.
You've got your data set all nice and pretty. And now it's like,
Now what?
which variables actually matter?
Right, exactly.
How do we figure this out?
Which ones are important for our model?
Chapter 4 is all about this. It's guiding us through multivariable modeling.
Oh, and it can get tricky.
Yeah, you can't. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so tempting to just
Throw everything in.
throw everything in there, all but the kitchen sink.
Everything but the kitchen sink, yeah.
Right. Like, more variables must be better.
More data, better model. That's got to be how it works.
But Harold really warns against this.
Oh, yeah. He cautions against this. He's like, no.
He calls it the events per variable dilemma.
Events per variable, yeah.
We're overfitting your model with too many variables.
You're going to get unreliable results. You're going to get misled.
Yeah, you're going to get stuff that's just wrong.
Yeah.
So it's like you're making this really amazing recipe, and you just keep adding ingredients, and eventually it tastes awful.
You've just ruined it.
You've ruined it, yeah.
Yeah. And your model might look really good with your specific data, but as soon as you try to apply it to new data, it's not going to work.
It falls apart.
It's like a house of cards collapses with the slightest breeze.
It really does.
Yeah.
So how do we avoid that?
Yeah.
How do we not build these statistical houses of cards?
Well, Harold, he really emphasizes that we have to strike a balance
Okay.
between the complexity of the model
Okay.
and the data that we have available.
So not too simple.
Not too simple.
Not too complex.
Not too complex. We need to find that Goldilocks zone.
Exactly. Just
That's right.
And he actually introduces
He does.
these really cool techniques
Yeah.
for data reduction.
Hmm.
Things like redundancy analysis, variable clustering, that can really help you manage how many predictors you're using without sacrificing too much information.
It's about being smart with your variable selection.
Yeah.
It's like, when a sculptor is chiseling away at a block of marble, they're trying to reveal the hidden form within.
I like that.
So it's about finding the essence of the data,
Yeah,
the variables that really matter,
Yes.
and letting go of the rest.
exactly. And so now you've built your model.
You got it.
You're staring at the results.
Excited.
And it's really easy to get super excited, especially if you find some statistically significant relationships.
Yeah.
But Chapter 5 really reminds us,
Pump the brakes a little.
yeah, to pump the brakes.
Yeah.
And to be careful about saying that, oh, this is cause and effect, because we found this with our regression models.
Yeah. Correlation versus causation. It's so tempting
It is.
to see an association and just jump to the conclusion that, oh, this causes that.
That causes that. Yeah.
And Harold is like, hold on.
He's like, no, it's not that simple.
It's rarely that simple.
Yeah.
There could be confounding variables lurking in the shadows.
Yeah.
Or other complex relationships that we haven't even thought of.
So it's kind of like we're trying to solve a mystery.
Yes.
But we only have like half the clues.
We got to find the rest of the clues.
Yeah, we might have a suspect, but we don't have all the evidence.
Right.
So how do we avoid jumping to those conclusions?
Yeah, how do we become more like those data detectives that we were talking about earlier?
Well, Harold really emphasizes
He does.
considering those confounding variables, those factors that can really mess up the relationship between those variables that we're interested in.
Yeah, those sneaky variables.
Yeah, they're sneaky.
I can really distort things.
They really can.
Yeah.
And he also reminds us that, observational data can only tell us so much
Right.
about cause and effect.
You can't always get at causality from observational data.
You can't. And so it's really about being humble.
Yeah, a little humility goes a long way.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
And being like, okay, this is just an approximation of reality.
It's a model. It's not the real world.
It's not the real world, yeah.
Yeah.
And he suggests using things like, bootstrapping.
Bootstrapping, yeah.
to validate these models.
Yeah.
And to see how robust they are to different variations in the data.
Like, okay, let's see how stable these results are if we change up the data a little bit.
So bootstrapping seems to be like a really big...
It's a recurring theme in the book.
Yeah, why don't you explain it a little bit more for our listeners who might not be familiar with it?
Sure. So imagine you have a bag of marbles, and each marble represents a data point in your data set.
Okay.
Bootstrapping is basically like taking a handful of those marbles out of the bag,
Okay.
putting them back in, and then doing that again, taking another handful out.
Okay.
And each time you're getting a slightly different sample.
Okay.
And you can use those different samples to assess, like, okay, how much do my results change?
Oh, see.
Depending on which data points I happen to have in my sample.
It's like you're giving the model a stress test.
It is a stress test.
Yeah.
You're seeing, like, how well does this model perform under different conditions?
And if it does well, you can be like, all right, we're
More confident in our findings.
more confident.
Yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears a little bit now and talk about a different type of data
Okay.
that pops up a lot in research, and that is longitudinal data.
Ah, longitudinal data.
Where you're tracking measurements.
Over time.
Yeah.
Over time.
On the same individuals.
Yeah. Chapter 7 focuses on this.
Yeah, and he talks about generalized least squares.
Yeah. Generalized least squares, or GLS for short.
GLS.
So we're talking about things like clinical trials.
Yeah, clinical trials, observational studies.
Yeah.
Where you're following people for months, years.
Yeah. And one of the challenges with this kind of data
What is it?
is that those repeated measurements from the same person
They're not
are
independent.
not independent.
They're correlated.
They are.
Yeah.
Which is one of the...
It violates the assumptions.
It does. The assumptions of ordinary least squares regression.
Of OLS. Yeah, so we can't just use regular old OLS. We can't. So it's kind of like if we were to think about it.
Yeah.
If we were to think about walking and we're like, oh, every step we take
Each step is independent.
is completely independent of the last step.
Right, but in reality, our steps are connected. They form a pattern, right?
Exactly. And so we need a special tool for this.
We do, and that's where GLS comes in.
That is where it comes in.
It's like OLS, but it's more sophisticated.
Yeah.
It takes into account that correlation.
Yeah.
It's like wearing special shoes
Okay.
that grip the terrain better
I like that.
when you're hiking up a steep, rocky trail.
I like that a lot. And, you know, the book does mention
It does.
some alternative approaches
Yeah.
to this. Things like mixed effects models.
Mixed effects models, Bayesian hierarchical models.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gives a good rundown of
Yeah, it
the
does.
pros and cons.
And it gives you kind of like a way to compare them.
It's like a toolbox
Yeah, it's a toolbox.
with different wrenches.
Yeah.
For different nuts, you got to choose the right one.
You got to choose the right one.
Exactly.
Okay, now I'm a little curious about something.
Yeah, what's on your mind?
It seems like this book really focuses a lot on the frequentist approach to regression modeling.
Yeah, it's definitely frequentist heavy.
It is. What about Bayesian methods?
Bayesian methods, they're not completely ignored.
Okay.
The book acknowledges that they're valuable,
Right.
especially in certain situations.
So it's not like frequentist versus Bayesian.
No. It's more...
It's about understanding the strengths and weaknesses of each approach.
Yeah,
And choosing the best tool for the job.
exactly. So you're not like totally against Bayesian methods.
Not at all.
You just...
They have their place.
They have their place.
Yeah.
The book actually kind of hints at the potential of using Bayesian methods for really complex modeling challenges.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
So like missing data.
Missing data,
Yeah.
incorporating prior knowledge. Yeah.
So it's like your secret weapon.
It's a good tool to have in your back pocket. Yeah. It's a good tool. Okay. Let's
Yeah.
shift our focus now to a chapter
Okay.
that deals with a very specific type of outcome. And that's binary outcomes.
Oh, binary outcomes, yeah.
The yes or no.
Yes or no, will this happen, won't this happen?
It's really common in research.
Yeah.
Predicting if a patient's going to respond to a treatment,
Yeah.
whether a customer is going to click on an ad or not.
It's everywhere.
Chapter 10, all about binary logistic regression.
The classic for binary outcomes.
So is this like a crystal ball for yes or no questions?
In a way, yeah. It's a
Okay.
way to estimate
Okay.
the probability of a yes based on a set of predictors.
And one of the key concepts here is the odds ratio,
The odds ratio, yeah.
which tells us how much the odds of that event change
Mm-hmm.
if we change the predictor by 1 unit.
It's a way to quantify the relationship
Okay.
between that predictor
Yeah.
and your yes or no outcome.
And again, just like in those earlier chapters,
Yeah.
Harold is like, hey, remember? Odds ratios, they're just measures of association,
Not causation.
not causation.
Yeah, it's tempting
know,
to
dude.
see that relationship
Yeah.
and say, oh, this is causing that, but we
Yeah.
gotta be careful.
We do.
It's like noticing that people who carry umbrellas are more likely to be wet.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that the umbrella caused the wetness.
Right.
It's probably that the rain caused both.
Yeah.
Right?
So we just got to be careful.
Yeah, critical thinking is key.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Now, we've thrown a lot at you in this deep dive so far.
A lot of information.
So what's resonating with you?
Yeah, what's standing out?
What are you finding interesting?
What's sparking your curiosity?
Yeah, what are you curious about?
What questions are popping up in your mind? It's been great to kind of revisit these like core ideas, you know?
Yeah.
It's easy to like get so caught up in the day-to-day of just like using these different techniques, but you kind of forget about like the core principles behind them, you know what I mean?
I totally get that. It's like driving a car. You don't necessarily think about like the engine and the mechanics and the transmission and all that stuff.
All the stuff going on under the hood.
Yeah, every time you get behind the wheel.
But it's good to know like how it works, right?
It's good to have like a basic understanding.
A basic understanding.
Yeah, and Harold really does a good job.
He does.
Of reminding us of those fundamentals, you know?
Yeah.
And he kind of challenges us.
He does.
To really think critically about every step of this.
Every step of the way.
Yeah.
Always be thinking.
Always be thinking.
Yeah.
Speaking of challenges, let's move on to a chapter that deals with a slightly different kind of outcome.
Okay.
So we've been talking a lot about, like, binary outcomes.
Yes. Yes or no?
Yes or no. But chapter 13, it gets into ordinal outcomes.
Ordinal outcome.
And this is all about ordinal logistic regression.
It's designed for those outcomes that have a natural order.
Okay.
But they're not necessarily equally spaced.
So give me an example.
So think of like a rating scale.
Okay.
Where you have responses like strongly disagree, disagree, neutral.
Okay, yeah, I see.
Agree, strongly agree. There's a natural order there, right?
Yeah.
But the distance between agree and strongly agree might not be the same as the distance between disagree and neutral.
Yeah, you're right. That makes sense.
Yep.
So ordinal logistic regression is kind of like...
It lets us model those kinds of outcomes while still respecting the order of those categories.
Okay.
But without assuming that the distances between them are all equal.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, I remember reading about a specific type of ordinal logistic regression model.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different types.
The proportional odds model.
Oh, the PO model.
The PO model, what makes that one so special?
So the PO model, it makes this assumption that really simplifies how we interpret those results.
Okay.
So it assumes that the relationship between a predictor and the outcome is basically the same across all those different cut points.
Okay.
Between the different categories.
So using our rating scale example,
Yeah.
like the effect of, let's say, age
Yeah.
on the likelihood of someone saying agree versus disagree
Right.
would be the same
It does.
as the effect of age on the likelihood of them saying strongly agree versus agree.
Exactly. And while this assumption
Right.
might not always be true in the real world,
Of course.
it's like a useful framework for interpreting the results of an ordinal logistic regression.
Yeah, it makes things easier to understand,
It does. It simplifies things.
easier to communicate to people.
Absolutely.
And of course, Harold, he reminds us to be careful,
As always, he's very cautious.
to check if this assumption actually holds up for our data.
Right. Make sure it makes sense for your data.
And if it doesn't,
We got to consider some other models.
you got to think about something else. Okay, let's switch gears again.
All right. Where are we going now?
Let's talk about survival analysis.
Ooh, survival analysis.
I think a lot of people, when they hear that term, they get a little intimidated.
That sounds scary.
It does sound a little scary. This is where chapter 20 comes in.
Chapter 20, survival analysis.
It really gets into the Cox proportional hazards model.
The Cox model. Yep. The workhorse of survival analysis.
Yeah, and so we're talking about situations where we're not just interested in will something happen,
Right.
but when it's likely to happen.
Exactly. Time to event data.
Time to event, yeah.
Yeah, like how long until a patient relapses or how long until a customer cancels their subscription, that kind of stuff.
So the Cox model is really good at handling this kind of data
The powerful tool.
because it doesn't force us to make certain assumptions about,
The shape of the survival curve.
yeah, the shape of the survival curve, which can be all kinds of crazy.
It can be all over the place.
It can be.
Yeah.
And the key concept in the Cox model
What is it?
is the hazard ratio.
The hazard ratio. Yep.
And this tells us how much that instant risk
Instantaneous risk.
of the event changes if we change the predictor by 1 unit.
It's a way to quantify the impact of that predictor on the risk of the event happening.
So it's kind of like the odds ratio,
It's similar to the odds ratio.
but for survival analysis.
Yeah, they both quantify relationships.
Okay.
But with survival analysis, we're really interested in that risk over time.
Okay. And one of the key assumptions
Here comes an assumption.
of the Cox model
Yeah.
is that
Proportional hazards.
proportional hazards assumption, which basically says that the hazard ratio stays consistent over time.
Yeah. If one group has twice the risk at one point in time,
Okay.
they should also have twice the risk at any other point in time.
So it's like if you're watching two runners in a race,
Okay, I like this analogy.
the gap between them stays the same throughout the whole race,
Yeah.
even if their speeds change.
Even if they speed up or slow down,
Yeah.
the relative risk stays consistent.
Exactly. And as with any statistical model,
Harold says, check your assumptions.
yeah, we always got to check it.
Make sure it makes sense.
We got to check, make sure it makes
For
sense.
your data,
And if it doesn't,
explore other options.
think about something else. Now, I know a lot of people find this stuff intimidating.
Statistics can be intimidating.
It can be, especially when you get into survival analysis.
Oh, yeah.
But Harold uses this really cool case study
Oh, yeah, the case study.
in chapter 21.
It brings everything to life.
It really does. It's like watching a detective at work, solving a mystery.
It is. He's like Sherlock Holmes of statistics.
He is. He really is.
Yeah.
And he walks you through analyzing this time-to-event data.
With a real-world example.
Yeah.
Step by step.
Step by step. And he explains every decision.
The reasoning.
The reasoning.
Potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
All the things you got to watch out for.
And how important it is to really carefully think about what these results mean.
Interpretation is key.
Yeah, it is. It's not just about
Not just about crunching numbers.
crunching the numbers.
Yeah, you got to think about what they mean.
You got to understand it.
Yeah.
And he emphasizes things like visualizing the data,
Visualizations are so important.
Yeah.
For understanding what's going on.
validating the model,
Making sure the model's doing what it's supposed to do.
sensitivity analysis.
Checking how robust the results are.
Yeah. So he's really teaching us to be
thoughtful.
thoughtful
Yeah.
and adaptable statisticians, not just like, here's the formula, plug in the numbers,
Not just robots, right? We got to use our brains.
use our brains. You got to think.
Yeah.
Now, this has been a lot. This deep dive has been pretty intense so far. What's standing out for you? What are you finding really interesting or maybe challenging?
I think for me, it's that idea of embracing the messiness of data.
Yeah.
You know, we're so often tempted to just simplify things.
Right.
Categorize, make everything all neat and tidy.
Make those nice little boxes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But Harold really reminds us that, like, when we do that, we might actually be missing out on some really important insights.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to take this complex landscape and like flatten it into a two-dimensional map.
Losing all the detail.
Yeah, we lose all the details, all the richness.
All the texture.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's like one of the most valuable things I got from this book.
Mm-hmm.
The importance of embracing complexity.
Yeah.
And then using the right tools, the right statistical tools to actually understand it.
And not being afraid of it.
Yeah, not being afraid of it. Now, I got to admit, regression modeling strategies,
Yeah.
it's not exactly like a beach read.
It's not light reading.
No, it's definitely geared towards a more like statistically sophisticated audience.
A little more advanced.
Yeah, it's a little more advanced, but even if you're not like a hardcore statistician,
It's still a lot to learn.
there's so much in there that you can take away.
Absolutely.
And I think anyone who works with data at all,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're not building these complex regression models, can benefit from the ideas in this book.
The principles.
Yeah, like understanding the assumptions behind what you're doing.
Yeah, like really understanding what those assumptions are.
Being careful about not saying, oh, this is cause and effect because we found this relationship.
Correlation versus causation.
And then, actually validating what you find.
Making sure it's real.
Yeah, it's like data analysis.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just like plugging numbers into a program and being like, oh, here's the answer.
You got to think.
You got to think.
You got to ask the right questions.
You got to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
You got to be honest with yourself about like what the data can tell you and what it can't tell you.
Be honest with yourself.
Yeah. So I really think it's about being a responsible data steward.
Using your powers for good.
Using your powers for good, recognizing the power of these tools that we have.
But also their limitations.
Yeah, the limitations. And I think
it's not just about finding the right answer.
No.
It's about understanding all those nuances.
Yeah.
Being transparent about the choices we make.
And I think ultimately it's about using data to make better decisions.
Mm-hmm. To gain a deeper understanding of the world and hopefully make positive impact.
Well said. Bill said. I think that's a great place to wrap things up.
It's been a good discussion.
This deep dive into regression modeling strategies has been like a huge eye-opener for me, and I hope that
Yeah.
you listening have also found some new ideas and insights.
Maybe you're inspired to, like, pick up a copy of the book yourself.
Yeah, definitely recommend checking out the book if you want to like really go
That's
deep,
dive in head first.
dive in. And even if you're not a statistician, I think like those principles and practices that Harold talks about
Yeah.
can help you just become a more critical,
A more informed
consumer
Yeah.
of data, which
in this day and age.
is so important.
That's a crucial skill.
It really is. So keep exploring, keep asking questions,
He's learning.
keep pushing the boundaries of
Absolutely.
what we can do with data. Until next time.
Happy analyzing, everyone.
Happy analyzing.